This day in sports history.
Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
Hey, look at you. You made it back for another edition of This Day in Sports History. You are a beautiful person. And I'm not just saying that because you're checking out my podcast. I'm saying that because you are, both inside and outside. Truly beautiful. So, this dish is a member of the Sports History Network, an amalgamation of like-minded sports nerds like me who just happen to love deep research into the history of sports. And you can find more info and more podcasts at sportshistorynetwork.com. Okay, let's get moving and grooving with today's episode. And, doing a podcast like this, meaning a daily podcast, takes a commitment. I have to put in work every day, no matter what. If I want to take a day off, well, that would break the streak, right? Well, on this day in 1995, a streak of legendary proportion was finally eclipsed because Cal Ripken refused to take a day off. It was a record a long time in the making. To pull it off requires stamina beyond that of mere mortals. It requires a commitment to show up and do the work every day. It requires a person willing to lean into the mundane. And you also better be good at what you do so the coach keeps putting you in the lineup. Baltimore's Cal Ripken was indeed inserted in the lineup on this day at his usual shortstop position, hitting fifth in the lineup, and he started his 2,131st consecutive game, breaking Lou Gehrig's record for consecutive games played. Of course, the game had to get past 4.5 innings for it to become official, but with a warm 89-degree day in Baltimore on this night, there was no threat from Mother Nature to make the baseball world wait one more day. 46,000 fans packed Camden Yards to watch their O's play the California Angels and see the game's new Iron Man do what he always seemed to do. When the Angels' Damian Easley popped out to end the top half of the fifth, the game became official and a 25-minute celebration began. Ripken understood the importance of what he'd done, but he didn't feel like, doing what he loved every day deserved more than a few curtain calls and a wave of the hat. But Charm City wanted to celebrate with him, and so after wave of his hat, the screams and adulation continued, until Ripken, sensing that more was being asked of him, began a slow trot around the ballpark, shaking hands and giving high fives to fans, teammates, opposing players, coaches, and his family. Cal made things a little more special in the fourth when he hit a solo shot to deep left. The O's won the game 4-2. Ripken continued his streak, playing another 501 straight games before ending it September 19, 1998, at 2,632 games. The streak nearly ended in 1993, though. On June 7th of that year, Ripken woke up with stiffness in his knee after getting mixed up in a benches-clearing brawl against Seattle the night before. If he had chosen to sit out, well, his streak would have ended 340 games shy of the mark. In 1981, the NFL put the Lester-Hayes rule into effect. Now, as a kid, I used to love watching the Raiders play, mostly because I loved to see Lester Hayes. One, because he was one of the best shutdown corners in the game, and two, I wanted to see how much stickum he'd actually put on himself that day. Hayes had been introduced to stickum, which is pretty much what it says it is, by his teammate Fred Biletnikoff when he was a rookie. Biletnikoff used it just on his hands, though, so it would be a little bit easier to catch a Kenny Stabler bullet pass. Hayes seemed to jump into a vat of it before each game. He covered himself in it. You could have hugged a pine tree and come away cleaner. Superglue was afraid of getting stuck to Lester Hayes. Well, on this day, Rule 5, Article 4, Item 8 went into effect. It said that, well, basically, You could not apply a sticky or slippery substance to your body, jersey, or any other part of your uniform. Nobody was lubing up with Vaseline before a game, so this rule became known as the Lester-Hayes rule. Prior to it, Hayes had 25 interceptions in his first 4 years in the league. After the rule, that number dropped to 14 in his final 6. So everybody did simple math and said, it must have been the stickum. But here's the thing. Stickum wasn't magnetic. Hayes still had to cover and get to the football. Second, how about quarterbacks stopped throwing to the guy he was covering? In Super Bowl 18, January 1984, he was a blanket on both Art Monk and Charlie Brown. So much so that Joe Theismann stopped looking their way. It's one of the great omissions from the NFL Hall of Fame that Lester-Hayes has not been elected. And the only reason he's not in is because guys who vote think he cheated somehow, even though the rule he became known for did not come into effect until this day in 1981. On this day in 1976, a horrifying scene played out in San Diego that would eventually lead to a revolutionary piece of equipment. The Los Angeles Dodgers were playing the Padres. It was another pleasant Southern California night. I mean, come on, it's San Diego, the most boring place to be a TV weather person. Well, Dodger catcher Steve Yaeger was kneeling in the on-deck circle, waiting for shortstop Bill Russell to take his cuts against San Diego's Randy Jones. Russell slapped at a Jones offering and hit a routine grounder to third. Doug Rader came up with it and threw to first for the out, but hardly anybody was looking at anything happening on the field. Instead, all eyes turned to Yaeger in the on-deck circle. Russell had broken his bat, and a large shard of it flew 50 feet like an arrow and plunged into Steve Yaeger's neck. Yaeger collapsed to the ground as if he'd been shot. Blood poured out from the wound, but the one thing that Yaeger did not do that undoubtedly saved his life is he did not try to remove it. The bat shard had missed his jugular, but not by much. A doctor came out of the stands, and Yaeger, still conscious, was able to sit up. Later at the hospital, doctors performed surgery on him for about 90 minutes, safely removing the shard and other splinters. The following day, in a consultation with a doctor, he was told that he could not take another shot to the throat again. It would kill him. So, did Yaeger retire? He did not. In fact, he'd be back on the field in 19 days with a new piece of equipment designed by Yaeger and the Dodgers trainer, a throat guard made from reinforced molded plastic that dangled from his catcher's mask to protect his throat from foul balls. It was soon adopted by other catchers in the league. Now a throat protector is built into each catcher's mask as part of the wire cage that protects his face and neck. And that all came about from the nearly tragic accident that occurred on this day in 1976. So we've talked about a couple of baseball's tough guys already in this episode. Well, how about this one? On this day in 1924, St. Louis Browns pitcher Urban Shocker pitched both games of a doubleheader. The Browns were on the road in Chicago, and I'm not certain why it was necessary for Shocker to pitch both games, but he did. He threw a complete game in Game 1, giving up 2 runs, walking 1, and striking out 1 in a 6-2 win. He pitched another full 9 in Game 2, walking 2 with no strikeouts, and another 6-2 complete game win. On this day in 1975, tennis player Martina Navratilova applied for asylum in the U.S. At this point, Navratilova was an 18-year-old Czechoslovakian. Her star was on the rise in tennis. She'd finished second in both the Australian and French Opens. She had been the 2 seed at Wimbledon before losing in straight sets to Margaret Court in the quarterfinals. She'd just wrapped up play in the U.S. Open the night before, where she had been defeated in straight sets by eventual champion Chris Evert. Czechoslovakia was a communist country at this point that certainly provided some challenges for Navratilova to live under. So she defected and applied for asylum in the U.S. She applied for U.S. citizenship and was granted citizenship in 1981. She would go on to win 18 major singles titles and spend a total of 332 weeks as the world's #1 women's tennis player. And on this day in 1978, Adolph Dassler died. If the name Adolph, or as he was known to his friends, Adi Dassler, doesn't sound familiar, maybe the shoe brand he started with his brother Rudolph will. The Dassler brothers started the shoe brand, and I'm going to pronounce it the way Americans do, Adidas, in the mid to late 1920s. Of course, in Europe, it's said Adidas. A rift between the two brothers occurred in the early 30s, with Rudolph saying it was because of Adolph's brother, Kathy, who drove a wedge between the two. Around 1933, Rudolph split off from Adi's company to form his own shoe company that he called Puma. Adi had success with Adidas, beginning with the 1936 Olympics. American Jesse Owens wore Adidas for the long jump and his sprint races. When Adolph died on this day, he had not spoken to his brother in over 30 years. Time now for today's nothing to do with sports aquatic fun fact. Have you heard of the immortal jellyfish? Well, these tiny, transparent creatures have a survival skill in response to physical damage or even starvation. Through a process called transdifferentiation, they take a leap back in their development process, transforming back into a polyp. Eventually, that polyp buds and releases medusae that are genetically identical to the injured adult. It was first observed in the 1990s and, theoretically, makes it the only known immortal creature on planet Earth. That's all I've got for you today. This and every episode of This Day in Sports History is researched, written, voiced, and produced by me, Steve White. I also created the music. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for another edition of This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.